So, welcome to part 2 of my FMOD-Reverb series. This time we're gonna look on how to implement reverb of FMOD into Unity. Up front, I wanted to point out that I'm not gonna cover how to integrate FMOD into Unity in the first place and how to start events and all that. Even though some processes are sort of similar for snapshots, I'm not gonna cover the very first steps of FMOD in Unity. There are some wonderful tutorials out there if you need to look into those first. The first and probably easiest and most recommended way is just using the FMOD component, event emitter, and a Triggerbox. So this is what we're gonna start with. For this, I've just loaded the, I think it's called first person starter pack asset to have anything to show you visually, but you can follow along in any other sample project or your own project. So we're gonna create a new game object as our parent. Just gonna call that FMOD-Reverb, and a new one for the container reverb over here. On that one, we're going to add the FMOD event emitter, and the interesting thing is that FMOD handles snapshots just as normal events, so we can trigger them with any function and as well the event emitter. So for this, I'm just gonna pick the room snapshot to change our reverb and set the event play trigger to trigger enter and trigger exit, as well as I want the reverb to be triggered when the player capsule over here, which has the player tag, enters that box, and not just any game object, which could be enemies or particles or whatever. We're gonna sort of filter that with that player collision tag. Nice. Additionally, we need a trigger box. This is called Box Collider in Unity, and we need to set this to isTrigger. Now we need to look around where our trigger box got added and sort of move it onto that container. Nice. So when we now press play to start that small demo game, and we walk into that box with our character, we hear how our steps are now reverberated. Small detail which you might have noticed is that the time it took until the reverb started and until it faded out was a bit off. That is because we added that automation in the last part, which is a bit extreme with 1 second fade in and 1 second fade out. So I'm going to shorten that to like 200 milliseconds and then give it any hold and decay. And as I'm having a live update on, that should change immediately. So yeah, it's a bit better, but I guess this is as well part of the reason why I'm making this series, is that we still have a sort of abrupt change in that space sense, because the moment we're entering the box, we just have that different reverb feel and it's not sort of approaching. But for now, we're gonna leave that as the basic setup regarding trigger boxes and gonna move on to triggering snapshots via code. For that, I feel like I had to force an example because trigger boxes really are the most convenient thing to do, as we're thinking of reverbs for spaces, and normally spaces are just separated in areas, and though we can use trigger boxes, I thought of an effect where, for whatever reason, the whole environment gets sort of trippy and you want to underline that with a huge reverb. So To simulate that trippy effect, I just changed the whole lighting to green with the press of a button. And now we want the reverb to be really huge and, yeah, off-putting, I'd say. For that, we're gonna stop play mode and move into our player capsule. Here I have this make trippy script, which I'm gonna quickly move into the screen. And here we're gonna add basically a link to that key press of the button T, which in game might be linked to any other thing going on, like, I don't know, maybe your health points dropping or whatsoever. Speaking about that, that's an effect which you could as well solve via a parameter inside of FMOD, which is linked to a few more things, and with that automate a reverb. I just wanted to show of the example of how to set up snapshots via code. So first of all, we need our event reference as serialized field. And now we're basically using the same code structure as we would for sound events. So if you're already familiar with that, you really should get along quite well. So we as well need to declare an instance of that snapshot, which we're then going to start and stop. This is just a type of event instance which we get from the fmod.studio package. Nice, so with this we're starting the instance and stopping it, and lastly we want to make sure that we are releasing the instance when we're destroying the whole game object. Awesome, so we can then close this script, and after the code is compiled and updated, we should be able to be asked for the snapshot we want to reference here. This is going to be the cave snapshot, which, yeah, in naming is sort of misleading here as we're using it for our trippy effect. And when we now press play and start the game, we should be able to hear the change in sound on our footsteps. Same again as with the corridor from before, we're still having that small fade in and fade out. But thinking about the trippy effect, I'd say the fade in and fade out is sort of matching. I would just change the duration of the lighting changing. Perfect. So to summarize, we have two major options to trigger snapshots for reverb in FMOD, which first of all are the Triggerboxes associated with a Snapshot studio event emitter, and via code, which then is up to your own decisions on how you want to use that. A major problem we already noticed is still that we have a sort of abrupt change between one reverb world and the other, which might feel kind of off because we are still using envelopes to change when we're walking in and out of a reverb zone, but we're gonna look into a solution for that in a later video. So for now, thank you a lot for watching and hopefully see you in the next. Bye.